These people had seen Americans in plenty, dusty, laggard trains of them, months out of their own country, and half crazed with the enormity of their own presence in that immense and blood-slaked waste, commandeering meal and meat, or indulging a latent taste for rape among the slow-eyed girls of that country. Now it was something near to an hour past noon, and a number of workers and tradesmen were crossing the street toward the cantina. As they passed Glanton's dog rose up bristling. They veered slightly and went on. At the same moment, a deputation of dogs of the village had started across the plaza, five, six of them, their eyes on Glanton's dog. As they did so, a juggler leading a funeral rounded the corner into the street, and taking a rocket from among several under his arm, he held it to the cigarillo in his mouth and tossed it into the plaza where it exploded. The pack of dogs shied and scrambled back, save for two who continued into the street. Among the Mexican horses tethered at the bar before the cantina, several shot out a hind leg and the rest stepped about nervously. Glanton's dog did not take his eyes from the men moving toward the door. None of the American horses even raised an ear. The pair of dogs that had crossed in front of the funeral procession veered off from the kicking horses and came on toward the cantina. Two more rockets exploded in the street, and now the rest of the procession had swung into view. A fiddler and a cornet player leading with a quick and lively tune. The dogs were trapped between the funeral and the animals of the mercenaries, and they halted and fattened their ears and began to sidle and trot. Hi, JVH.
Hi, Candy. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Not bad. I'm excited to talk about this chapter and to hear your voice.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I guess you've been away
I have.
and I've been busy at work.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Well,
So you're
yeah,
probably just like busy, busy, busy. I know.
busy, busy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the action in this chapter.
I think this is one of the most exciting. Yeah, like this chapter, I know. And the moods. I think it's one of the most exquisite chapters in the novel because it has a few different types of writing. Like the intro we just said is really a straight ahead, almost straight ahead fiction. And then of course there's all the inventive, strange words in this chapter, which we'll talk about a little further on. And then there's a very exciting shootout. I mean, the tension is tense. Yeah, I wanted to say
Uh,
before, huh?
oh, sorry. Yeah, I love the passage you read at the beginning of the episode. It's so motion filled, like it's just everything is happening and the narrator is just like one thing after the other thing happening, right? But everything
Mhm.
is in action and things are happening and something's building, right? Like you get this kind of tension that's
Definitely.
very super cinematic, like really Tarantino
Really, the
type
whole
of
chapter is very Tarantino, I think. Yeah, and I love the cigarello being lit with a fire, lighting the firecracker or the rocket, and then it's thrown in the street. You can imagine that's that definitely that high noon classic Western movie tension. And even the dogs are even confrontational. So
yeah.
that's pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah, so there's pop culture stuff in here, and didn't you want to make an announcement
I did. I
about?
wanted to say a couple of things. One, I just before we get into talking about the chapter one, there's a call for papers for the SWAPACA conference in Albuquerque. It's an incredible conference, very diverse, very innovative. I've seen perspectives being read about McCarthy or massive, all kinds of topics from comic books, game theory, Taylor Swift, a Grateful Dead, a Hitchcock, and then, of course, all kinds of um, other pop culture. I highly recommend it. There is an area being called for papers for Cormac McCarthy. So out there, go to the website and submit a proposal. It's a fantastic area of the world too, New Mexico. I also wanted to say something haunted me after last podcast when we were talking about why didn't anyone help Davy Brown get that arrow out? And
Right.
it occurred to me later, maybe they didn't feel invested in saving one of the gang. If somebody in their crew gets killed, hey, that's more money for them. It doesn't say that, but that's a classic heist movie kind of a scenario that someone dies and you're like, well, that's all the more for us, you know? And the other thing I wanted to kind of touch base with you about and listeners was that there's been a lot of McCarthy news in the last couple of years. Obviously, he passed away and he had two novels out. Then we had the scandalous Vanity Fair article with the shocking news of him having a teen girlfriend. And the New York Times responded, Slate magazine responded, and then we now have a Smithsonian article, which is a very fascinating article. Did you get to read it?
I did, yeah.
What'd you think of it?
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. I mean, I knew some of the things that were going on with the archiving
Yeah, me
of
too. Yeah.
Weber.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was that one quotation that was really interesting about the intelligence in the universe and us being fractal parts of it. And I don't know, the character of that intelligence is benign. So it's a bunch of interesting philosophical statements.
Yeah, I thought that one definitely was just very exciting for me, especially since, for the last 10 years, I've done papers literally talking about Mandelbrot theory and self-similar objects in McCarthy and in art history, so I feel like, damn, I just got validated there that he was and distributed cognition being all connected, right? And that the fractal, having a fractal design like on a Persian carpet or in pixelated films, that, pixelation, when the guy figured out if he used Mandelbrot theory, he could make film sets manifest like the landscape. You just repeat it, right? The pattern. And it
Right.
it, it made a big difference in CGI and special effects in film. And Jackson Pollock you had self-similar in his work. It was very exciting for me. Maybe we'll talk more about it and somebody could go on my Substack page and read what I wrote about it. I think I have an essay there about blood meridian and math and fractals and stupas and whatever. So it's scaffolding more information into a small space. And obviously, memory, it's very handy for memory to have that kind of scaffolding or offloading of information that you don't have to carry around with you, but you can access. And it does come up in chapter 13, which we'll talk about later. The Smithsonian article, I had so many emotions about it. One, I was so happy to see our colleagues working on it. I'd heard one of them somebody had told me they were selected to do it, so I wasn't allowed to talk about it. They probably weren't supposed to tell me. We'll just leave that to the side. So I've been pretty excited to hear about it. I texted Dennis and said he looks fabulous in the article because there's a picture of Dennis
What
there. But there were some things that were troublesome for me.
was
I'm
that?
just going to quickly mention it. One that they had Augusta Britt is the woman who McCarthy had an affair with when she was a teenager and left the country, afraid of being arrested, and went to Mexico with her. And I have not seen any academics speak out about the ethics of the situation. They've said some very open-ended comments about the article now gives us something to talk about, or we can now be honest about our criticism or something like that. But to me, I want to just reiterate what we said in our intro, in case there's a young person listening, and in case there's an adult thinking about an inappropriate relationship listening to this podcast. It's never appropriate and it's not ethical. It's more than her age. They changed the age to 17 in the article. Britt said she was 16. Um, and I don't know if that was rebranding the scandal or trying to make it better or just an accident. Second of all, it's never going to be okay for an adult to take advantage or to trade caregiving to an at-risk foster child because more than her age, and listen, I've heard comments since we did our intro about, well, don't get me started about the international age of consent, which I found disgusting thing to say about it because she was an at-risk youth in the foster system. And, McCarthy made a mistake. I absolutely love him. I love his books. Everyone makes mistakes in life. And I think even in the Blood Meridian, we can see some of the tragedy played out in his life in the novel. And I think further on with Alicia and Bobby, when Bobby doesn't want to have an incestuous relationship with his sister, it's hard for me not to think now that McCarthy is like, I'll show you a taboo relationship and I'll show you restraint. And at one conference, one of the when we talked about the passenger, it was funny because everyone's talking about how much they loved each other, the brother and sister in the passenger. And one fellow at the conference says, I just kind of found myself rooting for them. Like, why not be together? You know? So I could, it does, you're thinking it's love is love. And of course, Woody Allen said, you can't help who you love. That did not come from a good person. But anyway, I just wanted on the record in case to reiterate, because we're starting a podcast today, another recording. If you're out there and it's just not ethical, it doesn't matter. I mean, I just want someone to say it on the record. And I'm disappointed in the people that had the ear of the New York Times and Slate magazine and they didn't say so. So there you go.
Thanks for saying that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, a wonderful, wonderful chapter.
Awkward transition.
Awkward transition. Segue. I know. I'm trying to think. Do I have any other good notes I can just throw in there? I don't think I do. Any more announcements? No. Um, yeah,
Well, we did get at least one email a while back from one of our listeners who sent us some of his own creative work. So we're gonna have to get back to him on that
we are.
in the
You're
next
right.
episode.
You're right. Um, I mean, gee, if we get a couple more emails, we could have a whole episode on communications.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint.
Right?
Well, tell me what's your thinking on this? I thought there were some amazing words in this chapter and a lot of French words. And I thought, there's the judge. At one point, the judge is back in that role of hobnobbing with a leader, right? Like we saw in chapter maybe 5, and they find out he can speak all these languages. Well, in a way, we all speak many languages too, because English has incorporated so many other languages in it. Like we have debouched, which is a terrific word. French for the mouth, right? Debouche, and it's about,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a military term.
Military term, yeah, and it's also a geology term or a climate, like a river debouches into the ocean.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I thought there were some really good words in here. I thought, oh, this is back to Brit, Augusta Brit actually. The word animus occurs a lot, 5 times I think in this chapter. Oh no, in the novel. And I wonder, that's a lot of the word animus in one novel. I thought it could be almost overkill. Although it's hard to have overkill in this novel because you forget that you read the word already. But it made me think of Brit because she is described as somewhat of when she was young, a little bit of a tomboy maybe.
Okay.
Uh, a little bit of she had the feisty, what we might call a male, um, you know, stereotype attitude, and it's hard not to think of her as maybe like the kid. And that if other great writers, if men could write great writers of women, which they have done, Daisy Miller, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Madame Bovary. Why couldn't a man write a man that is actually based on a female? So, and she seems to think that she's in these novels after they were together. So, Animus obviously made me think of that because of the feminine, psychological idea of a masculine side of the female mind, right?
Right, right.
I could be screwing that up, JVH, and I'm sure you can correct me on that. But that made me
Uh,
think of that and her for some reason, just in this novel.
right. Well, what didn't wasn't it claimed in the original Vanity Fair article that the kid was kind of inspired by her as well as,
I think
John
you're
Grady
right.
Cole and
I think she did say that. I haven't read it since, but I think she did say that that was it. I knew for sure John Grady Cole, and that she felt that her violation, that most of us would have thought was a violation of intimacy, which she said that he gave her safety. I don't think she says she was in love with him. That's interesting too. That he gave her safety and a sense of security. But she felt violated for him putting her in his novels and parts of her life story in his novels. So that's kind of interesting. And he tells her that's what writers do. I'm a writer. That's what I do.
I think a lot of writers today think about the ethics of borrowing people's lives for their
I
writing.
think
I
you're
think that's a
right.
kind of a big in writing
I think you're right.
circles.
I used to hang out with a lot of stand-up comics, and I'd get pissed off because, I'd tell them a funny story. And if I didn't hear them say part of that story in their routine, I stopped being funny when we'd go out for beer. Like, I was like, fuck that shit. I'm not writing your material, right? But yes, there is a kind of creepy part about taking from life and so
But
directly
it,
from someone.
yeah, it's also what happens and what has
It
happened.
is. It is.
Ulysses is taken from life, and it's a weird sort of inversion, sort of pun intended, of like Henry James's technique. Like Henry James, was kind of like closeted queer,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of his, you mentioned Daisy Miller, like a
I
lot,
did.
but a lot of his women characters were kind of like figures for the love that dare not speak its name and stuff, like so here McCarthy is sort of also closeted from his own kind of shame, I
Mhm.
guess, or something, and he inverts his inappropriate relation or socially inappropriate relationship
Yeah.
with an ethically inappropriate
Well,
relationship.
that's so well said because of course, and Tess and the Madame Bovary, there's the idea that those men were gay men, and that they had the same social arena as women, and they understood women's subjugation as a marginal character, and that's why they were able to write such great characters. Certainly, I think men and women can write all genders and all, if we can write about dogs and horses, we can write about another male or female, and you take that
You would think,
challenge on, right? You take that
yeah.
challenge on of accomplishing that. Yeah.
So it's funny, like I just, also thought, because McCarthy has gone on record saying he doesn't like Henry James.
Oh, it is so
The
funny.
the normal way is to think of it, he doesn't like him stylistically, like James is verbose, a whole bunch of capital N nothing, you
Yeah.
know, like as his brother William James would have said. But maybe it's more like, he understands this kind of like, again, and allegory and the closet, of course, are two, kind of synonymous things, right? Allegory is a kind of closeted discourse, if, closeted in any way you want to think of.
Yeah.
Maybe in a politically dangerous situation, what you closet is your contrary politics, but maybe you're also, you want to express, but you also don't want to take
Hmm.
the risk of expressing.
Hmm.
And so you create these indirect discourses.
Yeah, and I think that's being part of a creative too, is that, some of the best art has that transgression, has something in it that, you've explored with it, you've pushed something and it's, the idea of shock or something like that. But that is a valid part of art. Look at Goya's painting of the monster eating all the people, right? The big ogre. I mean, that's a beloved painting and it's probably pretty gross at the time. Maybe we're used to it now, but it
Yeah, and
probably.
like Blood Meridian is based on a text called My Confession.
Uh-huh. That's
So
right.
that's what we don't get in Blood
You're
Meridian.
so smart. Oh,
We don't
JVH, I
we
never
get sort
thought
of
about.
like there's like the life of the writer and those around, in
Yeah.
this case him, are in this book, right? But they're in there diffused and indirectly. So he can express, you know, the
And
personal, but in this story of that has nothing to do with him as a person.
correct, correct. And again, when you find out that story, the Vanity Fair story, he would have written Blood Meridian. It would have been wrapping up when he was suffering from a probably a broken heart. She left him. Um, and she quotes him as saying, that he had said later in life, we could have been together all this time. So he seemed to hold out something for her, definitely. And the tragedy in the novel and the tone of the novel could be coming from that kind of agony.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, like I would also take his distaste for Henry James at face value.
Oh yeah,
Like James, there's not a lot of action, and it's more like people sitting in a drawing room having delicate conversations about subjects they'd rather not talk about.
right.
But this chapter too, it's all action. Like
Yeah,
it's a between the last chapter and this chapter, there's no kind of temporal break or sort of resetting like that happens at the beginning of a lot of chapters. It's just
yeah.
continuous. So like chapter 12 kind of ends like a caesura, and then chapter 13 just picks up immediately what where the last chapter left off, and as they enter into Chihuahua City for I think the first time, but the also the whole structure of the novel is really interesting in terms of its movement and motion and things that are, and it's very event focused, it's about happenings. And but it's also a kind of the trajectory of this chapter also has a kind of sort of ironic structure in its motion, right? Because it begins with them entering into Chihuahua City, and then it ends with them exiting or and re-entering and re-exiting the same city under very different circumstances.
So
So
true.
so it's a repetition, but with a difference.
Yes, I do like that observation very much. Yeah, so when there's a couple of funny things in this. When they, if we want to get into the kind of plot part of it for a second, they enter Chihuahua City and they've got all this, bounty and it's going to get paid for in gold. And then they go out and proceed to spend it on new clothes and new outfits and on women. And they describe them putting on these new clothes and they don't fit. They're too small for them sometimes, which is
Yeah.
hilarious because I mean, you'd think that they could get some clothes sewn, but they must have just bought them right off the rack. And
Yeah,
just or they don't know any better of how a suit should fit. It's like a bit of a combo of both. So, we just found these murderous, terrible villains. It's like in Pulp Fiction. We don't know why uh the two guys, Samuel L. Jackson and Travolta, are wearing gym shorts and t-shirts. We just see them and you're like, what? And then you
right.
find out till later why they're wearing
Yeah.
them. But I felt like it was like there's another Tarantino in this chapter, right? And Tarantino hadn't even made a movie yet when this book came out. But yeah, the gang comes out in these shrunken clothes or whatever. It's so hilarious. They look comical, which adds to the carnival theme.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they enter into the city and they're greeted as heroes, and it's all a fantasy of music and flowers, as it says at the end of the last chapter.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of, yeah, it is a carnival, like, and that was, and we've talked about this, like, I immediately started thinking about ideas of the carnivalesque because it's a kind of, there's a lot of humor in the chapter, like, you've already pointed out the clothing, and there's a lot of like humorous exaggeration and amplification, like uh, the description of the judge's haberdashery or whatever, like is
Yeah.
he's got this big hat made of two lesser hats, and whole bolts of cloth went into the fabrication of his suit, which like, and so it's the rhetoric is all sort of like amplified, but in a kind of carnivalesque.
Totally. Totally.
And like it is great. Like, they enter into the city, and then the city knows what's going on, right? Like they know that first, these people have kind of like freed them from the terror of the Apaches, and so they're higher in the sort of social hierarchy, but they're also part of the economy. So that the merchants just come out. They know, like everybody in the city knows the Glanton gang is about to come into massive amounts of coin. And so, but it's just kind of, like put it back into the economy. Like, here, we'll dress you up, but you'll pay us. And there's this, there is that kind of like carnivalesque spirit in you know, the inhabitants of Chihuahua, and the Americans just turn it upside down. So I don't think the writing is like carnivalesque the
No.
way Bakhtin would have said, Rabelais is carnivalesque writing. But it's more sort of like Bakhtin also makes this distinction between, the carnivalesque as kind of, the spirit of the people, like folk democracy, blah, blah, blah. And he opposes it to the spectacle, which is like authoritarian, and it's optical authoritarianism rather than optical democracy.
Hmm.
There's a distance, and there's a power differential in the spectacle.
Hmm.
And so, like, I think the writing, like because of the subject matter, the writing tends toward the spectacular rather than the carnivalesque. I don't know. That's just a thought I'm having at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're onto something though. Definitely. I appreciate the Bahkin observations too. I think when we had a production meeting the other day, you said something about spectacle versus grotesque, and one of them was kind of a device of allegory.
Yeah, spectacle sort of is, right? Like I think Spencer at the in his letter to Sir Walter Raleigh, in the book one of the Fairy Queen, the letter that prefaces the first book, says, like his task as an allegorist is basically ideological, to fashion proper English courtiers,
Mm,
right? And the fashioning happens through the interaction of the reader with the allegory. So the allegory, as it were, sort of initiates them into proper conduct. Yeah. But Spencer also says like that kind of process of subjectification, turning somebody into a proper subject,
mhm.
is better done with spectacular means than by discursive means. So, a storyteller is going to be more successful than a preacher or
Absolutely.
a philosopher.
Yeah. Yeah. And probably engaging that imagination so you live through it. You
Yeah, so
go
so
in to live through it. Yeah.
and an allegory theorist like Angus Fletcher might say that allegory tends toward actually stasis and frozen images, and you become your name basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
Holiness becomes holiness by the end of book one of the Fairy Queen. So there's a kind of tendency towards stasis. And I don't, at least in early modern English allegory, with Benjamin and the European allegory of the Baroque, which is actually not that much removed from Spencer, maybe 100 years or so,
Mhm.
becomes more less about stasis and less about fixing things into a final order than about kind of the impossibility of transcending transience, right? Everything is transience. Everything tends toward ruination
Mhm.
um, and decay. And so, like, this is kind of like the spirit of the Enlightenment, discovering the emptiness of the passing moment or something like that.
Mhm.
And we do have this kind of I feel like in Blood Meridian there is a kind of Baroque spirit
Mhm.
at work because there is this kind of experience and sense of transience that again is sort of like the narrative keeps um, hitting upon in different ways in those kind of fractal self-similar ways that we've been talking about. And that happens when in this chapter, after sort of the party and the carnival of of Chihuahua City, when the gang or when the Americans, as McCarthy starts narrating or calling them more frequently,
Mhm.
uh, when they massacre um, when they massacre was it the Tigwas. And there's this kind of paragraph description of women coming back from washing. They missed the massacre. They were working,
Mhm.
and then they come back and their whole camp is destroyed. And there's just the scene of this woman starting to sweep up, and then the narrator basically says, in soon all trace of this event will disappear and nobody will remember. So there's that kind of sense of transience in there.
Well, interesting that the erasure too, because the judge crosses off another petroglyph in this chapter as well, and that's his modus operandi is to erase something he doesn't want people he wants to have the knowledge. And it's funny that she's erasing the dirty, the tragedy, even herself.
Right, yeah.
You've got to clean up, but I mean, and bury the dead and such. But still, it is
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
interesting that it's framed as forgetting, you know.
Yeah,
Spirit.
but I mean that's that we the the carnival part still is pretty awesome, and
It really is beautiful.
you
And
know,
it's like the second, what is it, second line, first line in New Orleans, where it's, it's not a funeral I grew up with. It's a quite a different party environment for a funeral. The music, the dancing. So it was really much like New Orleans, I thought.
yeah, and I had underlined in this rereading like um and this goes back to your original observation of how like all these merchants came out immediately and spread their wares all along the clay tiles behind them, and including like suits of European cloth and closed-napped beaver hats. And I just it makes me think of the ironies of like global capitalism, right? Because you know especially in Canada, right? Like
Mhm.
colonists would like bring the beaver near to extinction because beaver hats were like so popular in Europe,
Yeah.
you know. And so like here a beaver from like one part of Turtle Island makes it to European manufacturing industries and then comes back into Mexico to be sold to, like it's just like
Hilarious. It
it's
was
sort of
great.
like there is that global capital undercurrent, even in this like very, local scene of
Yeah, you would
be
not,
limited in time and place.
yeah, you're not expecting it. But it's like, hey, we're gonna have the trendy outfits. It's what the people want. Um,
Yeah, and like we should probably talk about, I mean, you'd made some you were interested in like the dance scene. In the first night when the Chihuahuans have not yet started regretting
right,
allowing the Glanton gang into the city,
right.
right? Before they've totally trashed the place.
Yeah,
Um,
you're right. So that is the first. This chapter is quite long, and it is divided into six sections. So that's quite a lot of sections compared to the previous chapters. And the first part is this dancing. This
it's
they get
basically yeah,
they
this
go
one.
into a bath. They're also so filthy that before they get their good clothes on, they go into this public bath, and it's basically they turned it into a bordello. I think it says in the book, right? And I thought about the AIDS, New York City closing down the bathhouses that turned into, you know, sexual encounter areas, right? But it was funny that the debauchery starts right away, even in the bathtub, and the whole town comes out and looks at them because they're something to watch. They watch them have a bath, even, and we hear a great description of the judge
Oh yeah.
in this that he sinks in. He's got no hair anywhere, not in any crevice. He's
Yeah.
completely, he must have alopecia. And
Like Stan Sitwell on Arrested Development.
yes, yes. And he climbs into this, the bath, and you just imagine the bath getting deeper, right? And he sits there and is like smiling under the water, like you can tell he's got this grin and he's half an,
Right, yeah.
except for the dome of his shiny head.
Yeah, he's got a cigar smoking on his ear.
Eight.
Yeah, which and that, like his alopecia or hairlessness or whatever is not like Chamberlain's judge. There's an image of the judge in my confession that
Right.
Chamberlain has drawn, and the guy has like a ponytail.
Yes.
I think,
I
if I
think you're right.
remember.
I think
Double check.
he's got like a really bad
He's
hairstyle.
got like a he's
So,
got like a Davy Crockett hat on, and I think he
yes.
has a ponytail as well.
No, it does look like that. It does look like it. It's my
But
memory.
here he's like hairless and pale, and
Mm.
and he's likened to a manatee. So we get this kind of Moby Dick,
Hmm.
association, this hairless mammal, who likes the water, So
Hmm.
he's got this, kinship
Yeah.
with sea creatures or
Does. And I guess, it's a
mammalian.
weird casting to make him like the whale. Although he's also like Ahab. So he's
Yes.
kind of both of them, but it is kind of clever to make him whale-like. And I thought that he was, I always thought he was like Kurtz, Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. And then I got screwed up because I thought that they show Kurtz in the
Right.
whale,
Yeah.
but it was actually Captain Willard. But there's another movie that I
But
think
it's an iconic image, right? Of
is an iconic
from
image
Apocalypse
from
Now.
Apocalypse Now. And oh yeah, it's like a movie poster. It's like the still. If you went to the movies back in the day, they always had stills from the movie, right?
Yeah,
On
yeah,
a glass board. I don't think anybody does that anymore. And they're so collectible, those things. Yeah, but it was a big image with this. And then there's another character in the movies which I not only do I feel Apocalypse Now was a huge influence on this novel, but this movie called Missouri Breaks. And I hope you get to watch it. Marlon Brando plays someone called a regulator. So he comes in, I guess, if there's horse thieves, and he's not the normal law, he comes in and takes care of them, if you will. And he regulates the law, if you will. I think that's where regulator comes from. But his character is so flamboyant and over the top and compelling. He steals I mean, Brando always stole the show in anything he was in, but he really does, even next to Jack Nicholson, who's also in this movie. And Nicholson plays down his, what we think of Five Easy Pieces, his I hate authority. He's still like that in the movie, but he lets himself be different than Brando, and it's quite good to see. And I highly recommend anyone who would not have known of this old 70s movie to watch
yeah.
Missouri
It sounds
Breaks.
amazing.
It really is a delightful movie. I got my husband to watch it about a month or so ago, and he was like, "Oh my God, yeah, this is a lot of fun." Yeah, um, a very
So yeah, like a lot of citation of current culture in the novel, probably. Like,
yeah. Well, even your when you notice God damn you, Holden, coming from
yeah, I don't.
reference in Salinger. I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
We don't know. But
That could just be.
we do know that McCarthy was interested in Salinger.
But
Because
speaking of like projecting
yes,
things onto the text,
yes.
there like when the first dance in this chapter, right,
Mm-hmm.
is the Americans debouched into or debauched, or how do you pronounce that? I'm not
Debouched,
sure.
but I don't know how Americans would pronounce it. I would say debouched, but
Into the dancing hall, and like we read that the judge kind of consulted with the band and a quadrille was struck up, and then we read a great lurching and stomping ensued, while the judge, affable, gallant, squired first one and then another of the ladies through the steps with an easy niceness.
Mhm.
So this is like, for a lot of things happen in these sentences. Like first of all, we get, confirmation maybe of Tobin's prior statement that the judge is a great dancer. When we're going to get that again at the end in the climactic dancing scene, at the end of the novel when the kid, now the man, meets the judge in a dive in Fort Griffin, Texas, I think, right?
Mhm.
But like if you go to that last chapter, that we actually get a repetition that links it to this chapter. So in this chapter, we read a great lurching and stomping ensued when this quadrille was struck up.
Mhm.
Well, in this last chapter, we do again, I think, um, where we hear a quadrille, and we also hear that I'm reading from literally the last page of the novel,
Mhm.
that the dancers stomped and hooted and lurched against one another. So we go from a great lurching and stomping to, the dancers stomped and hooted and lurched. So we have this lovely repetition um, that, kind of ties these very different parts of the novel together.
That's so interesting. And I like it that it's in the middle of the book. Your observation of the novel, not just the time doesn't end between chapter 12 and 13. It carries on. It marries those two as the middle of the book in a really nice way. Like
Right, yeah.
Spencer would agree his structure of some of his work would have that middle joined like that and then fold out. And
Beautiful.
interesting, yeah, that we go to the last page of the book with those words because that is pretty specific. And there's a couple of things in this chapter we're getting to where you'd think an editor would say you can't do that twice in the book. You've already said stomping and lurch. And if you write a paper, we try to not have the same words over and over again, right? Try to find a different way to say things if you can. And um, there's some other things that happen in this chapter that it's like there's no way an editor couldn't notice that and say, why would you do this? Why wouldn't you have this? So we'll get to that in a little bit, but it is odd. So it shows how purposeful it is. It's absolutely purposeful because most people would describe the dance differently at the end.
Yeah, to me, it's like, these repetitions, they seem, marks of intention. I'm not going to say they were intended. I'm just going to say that there is intention marked in this repetition.
Yeah.
And like, that gives me a kind of architectural feel. Like now I'm being introduced into the architecture of the novel or the infrastructure, and so like I have to think about why this repetition has occurred. Like it's been pointed out to me in its very instancing, right? As it repeats and I sort of like apprehend the repetition, then I have to determine why that is. So that kind of leads me into this kind of great feel that, the novel has a kind of a bigger structure or an architecture to it. It's sort of like the thing that Peter Brooks describes in an old psychoanalytic critical work called Reading for the Plot, when why do we keep reading things? Because we desire, somehow the words like elicit some kind of desire for us to keep reading. And for me, the desire is like it's generated when I get these kind of like glimpses into the architecture of the
Mhm. Well, it sounds like you're getting close to being initiated into the Illuminati.
I'll
Because
let you know when it happens.
oh, it'll be obvious.
Or you'll know.
I'll know, and I've only initiated one other person, and it took 20 years. And we were reading Shakespeare. Um, and actually he helped me he's sometimes he'll help me when I see something in Blood Meridian, I'll send him a message and go, "Do you notice this?" But yes, it's all about the structure. The structure is what that secret history of art is embedding not just the philosophy is like allegory embedded in, but there's a different embedding going on physically in I believe in some of McCarthy's work, which ties him to Shakespeare and Spencer and Asian artifacts, Stonehenge, if you will, that were designed
Yep.
clinically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
so there would be the internal architecture of the
yes.
novel, but then there's also the kind of like intertextual
Mm,
architecture, if I could say that.
right.
And like so also like in my own previous like kind of critical work on the novel, like I've kind of mentioned that or I've made the claim or like I'm projecting this onto the novel
Yeah.
that this repetition of quadrilles
Mm.
is another way for McCarthy to point out the intertextual relation between Blood Meridian and Thomas Mann's Tonio Kruger. This
Oh.
novella from, I don't
Mm.
know, I want to say 1906, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like so, Tonio Kruger is a kind of it's a Künstlerroman or Bildungsroman, right? Like it's an artist's development story. And so the young, the Mons novella kind of like narrates the life of this artist, beginning when he's 14, then he's 16, and then he's older. And so like McCarthy's kid is like 14, 16, and then older. And there are two dance scenes in Tonio Kruger, both involving a quadrille, And so, like, I feel, and of course, then there's the chapter subheading in the last chapter, the German phrase, Sie müssen schlafen, aber ich muss tanzen. You must sleep, but I must
Yes.
dance,
Yes.
which has, been, John Sepich, I think, maybe
Mm.
the first to kind of link it to Antonio Kruger
Mm.
as a quotation of an earlier poem.
Mm.
Anyway, so like for me, it's also like here's another moment where Blood Meridian is kind of making an intertextual claim that there's a relationship between this novel and that novella, which is again kind of strange. It's because the two are very, very dissimilar stories. One's about like a early 20th century kind of decadent artist, and the other one is about a child soldier, like so. what exactly is being asked of us to how to relate these two things. So
Mm,
that's so and again that's the kind of moments in the text that excite me when there are these citations or allusions and which suggests some kind of that the writer has put some thought into,
mhm.
that this relates with that, but why is figuring out why is up to you.
Right. And it's something in contemporary culture we see all the time in hip hop. So it's like he puts it, in many ways, Blood Meridian is such a mashup, the mashup thing where you put two songs over each other,
Yeah,
so it's part of what keeps it feeling fresh and contemporary, I think.
yeah.
And
Yeah, hip hop is, the great citational art of today, both musically and lyrically, I think.
yes, 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 for sure.
But yeah, and then another sort of thing was like so the party, just keeps going, right? I think I think the governor and his people probably were hoping that the carnival would end, like but
Uh-huh.
no, it just keeps going and they're basically just draining the resources of the city and terrorizing its inhabitants such that, we get graffiti appearing, better the Indians than these Americans. And we get this uh, I love this line that the citizenry made address to the governor, but he was much like the sorcerer's apprentice who could indeed provoke the imp to do his will, but could in no way make him cease again. That also is like it's great because it's also kind of citational. Like not
Mhm.
only does it cite probably, Walt Disney's Fantasia and the Sorcerer's Apprentice
Yes.
uh, thing that happens in there, but also like the Sorcerer's Apprentice was made famous. It was a German folktale, put into artistic form by Goethe. And, like,
Mm.
th there's this whole Germanic thing going on in Blood Meridian. And so this is another, there's Thomas Mann being quoted, Jakob Böhme. Also, Goethe seems to be hovering around, with his Faustian kind of narrative.
Hmm. What would that be? Would that be some kind of art movement that came out of Germany that he's riffing on? What would be the connection? Uh,
I don't know. I think like, I mean, Jakob Böhme is like the 17th century. So
yeah.
that's sort of like, the age of the Baroque. But the other guys, well, Goethe is like kind of like somewhere between classicism and romanticism, and Thomas Mann is, maybe somewhere at the end of romanticism and the beginning of modernism.
Hmm.
So I don't really know if it's just a German thing in
Right.
general
Right.
or something specific?
Right. So back to this party. Yes. I wanted to see if you had figured out we had a price once before. Remember they have 128 scalps and 8 heads?
Right.
I forgot to double check the price that they would have been making per scalp,
Well, it would have depended, right? So if
female or male.
uh or child, yeah. So I think there were three prices, like maybe it was 150, 150,
Yeah.
like for man, woman, child.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it while we're sitting here. Um,
But we don't know how many of each type of scalp.
no, that's true. That's true. Right. So I've got, well, then another one. So it's, yes, you're right, 100 to 200 pesos. And today it equates to about 8,000 per scalp. So that's a
That's
lot
a
of
lot of
money.
money.
That really is a lot of money. Yeah.
And they basically blow through it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
$1 million.
yeah,
Is it really $1 million?
I don't know.
128 times 8,000? It's $1 million. It's
That's
crazy.
that's crazy.
Yeah. We blame my calculator if it was wrong. Yeah, that's crazy. Um, so yeah, they were almost sitting ducks when they went into that town. So they start. The Germanic thing, I keep thinking to do with expressionism. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I feel like there must be something. The other thing was maybe it's a peer thing that the possibility that the judge could have read those. He couldn't have read Thomas Mann, but he could have read those other writers, Goethe
Yeah, yeah,
and
for sure.
you know,
And being,
it's kind of fascinating to think of him coming from that. And again, I joked on the other day with you on the phone about maybe he's German American. um uh the judge because learned Dutch from a Dutchman. Maybe it was his father, maybe it was his family. Maybe he is Dutch. I don't know. Or
yeah, I think I also kind of think it's just sort of general, right? Like because it's sort of like America is kind of like Anglo-Saxon.
hmm
And at the end of the day, Anglo-Saxon, like the English are kind of German. You know what I mean? Like
yes, that's true.
so like it's also a kind of broader reflection on, I think, Anglo-Saxonism.
Yeah, I think you're
And
right.
especially racial Anglo-Saxonism, right? With its like worried distinctions between, white, black, and indigenous.
hmm hmm So we both kind of found one of these crazy sentences here, um about
Yeah, nomenclature. Yeah, like speaking of distinctions, I
yes,
guess
yes.
the lack of them. Yeah, it's one
Page
of these
180.
it's one of these amazing sentences that give the company a kind of cosmic grandeur, and you're like, "Oh, wow, these guys are amazing."
Right.
Even though they're the worst.
Right. Well, you also pointed out the idea of that sentence where they come in and it's electric.
Yeah, that's right.
The
Yeah.
air altered and electric around the Americans, like the aura of, and it's like, what were they like? Were they like rock stars? Were they like Reservoir Dogs? Or were they like psychopaths? The energy
Yeah.
was fear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, deployed upon that plane, they moved in a constant elision, ordained agents of the actual, dividing out the world which they encountered, and leaving what had been and what would never be, alike extinguished on the ground behind them.
Mm.
Spectre horsemen, pale with dust, anonymous in the crenellated heat. Above all else, they appeared wholly adventure, primal, provisional, devoid of order, like beings provoked out of the absolute rock and set nameless, and at no remove from their own loomings, to wander ravenous and doomed and mute as gorgons, shambling the brutal wastes of Gondwanaland in a time before nomenclature was, and each was all. I mean,
It's
it's
unbelievable.
it's so over the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
It
kind
is so over the top. There's like layers of mesh and spider webs and roses and desert, and it's crazy. And we both kind of noticed
almost
in it
campy.
almost campy. Well, yeah, it's floored. Yeah. In a time before nomenclature was, and each was all.
Yeah,
I have a note on here that it made me think of optical democracy. Each
yeah,
was all, where things were oneness, you know? He doesn't have everything in that oneness being happy-go-lucky because there's, the Gorgons and doomed and mute, but it is interesting that each was all. The idea of hierarchy is different. Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I so this is a kind of like an image of, like before like hominids had language or something, right? So
yes.
it and so the idea I think is that language is somehow um something that we have acquired that separates us from that experience of each being all.
Mhm.
That experience of maybe not that there's no boundaries, but that all boundaries are permeable. And so, language somehow tricks us into thinking that the boundary between self and nature is impermeable or something like that. But yeah, so it's a kind of a sense of being embedded in everything.
Mhm.
It's like like I said this to you before too. It's also like kind of like a theological idea of apokatastasis.
Right.
which is
Can you
mentioned briefly, I think.
elaborate that? It is
Yeah,
mentioned?
it's mentioned briefly in a letter of St. Paul, and then kind of developed into a theology by this guy who castrated himself in the fourth century, named Origen of Alexandria,
Oh,
and then that doctrine was kind of anathematized by the Orthodox Church at some point. So it's always been kind of a heresy
yeah.
that, different thinkers come back to at different times, I guess. But it's more or less that, like the idea that the universe as a process, or hell is not eternal, but a kind of place of remediation where we refine away our sins and we are restored to our original state, which was, planned or imagined by God at the beginning of time. And so, like, apokatastasis means that hell is impermanent and that even Satan will be redeemed at the end of the process. And when the process is concluded, God will be in everything. So everything will be a particular variation of everything else. You know what I mean? So, like, each is still each, but at the same time, it's all. I don't know. It's anyway. That's a theological idea, but this has something more to do with McCarthy's sort of philosophy of language and what he thinks language does to us. And, like, he always has this kind of adversarial attitude toward language that, the name kills the thing. Language is a kind of virus that replaces everything.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, but I mean, the campy sort of like exaggeration of the cosmic significance of these guys is it's just great language. It's so seductive. It's like you just love it. It's actually kind of musical. It's like poetry. So it's almost like the music is more important than what's being said. And but then it kind of tricks us, I think, like because it's so, beautiful in its imagery and its music that, we forget what we're being narrated,
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And and you cannot intellectualize it in some ways. You cannot read through it and not stop and like good food, you've got to look at the recipe and kind of figure it out because it 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 feels good reading it, but then you're like, what does it mean? You can't know it at the same time in a weird way. It really does control the reader in a lot of ways. Whereas,
Yeah, but yeah, for sure. Like I think it does manipulate us in ways, but I don't want to like make it sound really bad because
oh no, no, no.
like since our last episode, there was a widely televised assassination that spread
Oh,
through all social media, and I'm kind of thinking about like violence in imagery and in discourse, and then I think about like this novel, and people, it's often characterized as an incredibly violent novel, but and it is like it describes horrible things, like,
mhm.
but it's a different kind of violence than, the violence of the images of people being killed or, like, or people uh, talking, in inflamed ways about other people, like
That's true.
that has happened in the wake of all of that assassination.
Very good point. Yeah.
But so anyways, like it is incredibly beautiful. And so like I also just must imagine McCarthy when he's writing this, right? He's like,
Mhm.
fuck, that was a good sentence. And like, like
I think so.
nobody can stop me from writing this.
Exactly. I think he really did get a kick out of that. He liked, throwing all the extra paint in there.
Yeah, and the extra paint is, like a lot of it is used up in like these weird words that you were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
What
Yeah,
what
with
were
this-
what were you referring to?
well, like I said, I love the, um, well, Ellison, Elysian. It's interesting that that was in that one section because that's a linguistics term that you just read the whole sentence, and
Right, yeah.
and it's interesting. It's in that. linguistic reference in that paragraph. And again, it's a real hint about being self-conscious because you wouldn't think someone would throw that into a novel, that word, in some weird way.
Yeah.
And that's again, he's so good at it. So I feel like it's self-referential to the novel in some way. It's a deleted
Well, I
three.
mean, thank you so much actually for for pointing that out because elision is like when we omit something,
Ah, yeah.
right? So I mean, we were kind of talking about like the way Cormac McCarthy has omitted a great deal of his life, like in his work, even as he's put some in indirect ways, But elision is like also the kind of the whole method of the writing, like the epigraphs are elisions from, they're like excerpts, but also they've been shaped in such a way that, like in the Burma epigraph, there was a clause that was elided,
Correct.
and in in the Valerie epigraph, there were other sentences that were that he took that from not from Valerie's text directly, but from that other text on by the physicist,
Hmm.
and that excerpt he also elided some of that from his source. So and he's eliding things from Samuel Chamberlain, and so like the allegorical method is kind of like to omit.
Hmm.
And I mean in allegory we say everything except for the thing we are really talking about, right?
Right.
So we so allegory is a method of elision.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that they moved in a constant elision, like that's all, like that's really interesting.
It is
Also,
because
what does that mean by literally like they're omitting, they moved in a constant omission, like are
they're
does that have to
deleting
do with
land behind them.
right?
I was thinking
Hmm.
like that what's behind them is done. It's deleted, and of course
Yeah,
the judge is a deleter. He's
yeah,
he's
yeah,
deleting, as we said at the beginning of this, and over the
yeah,
we're always
yeah,
going to talk about him doing that because it's such a huge part of this story. And right up to the ending, it's part of the story. I thought Pandemoniac was cool because it's from Paradise Lost, correct? Milton's
yeah,
Paradise Lost, and then you have pandemonium again in this chapter. You're talking about the
yeah,
repeating, and that
yeah,
repeats.
yeah, and I mean, speaking of repeating, it's also like it's not just a reference to, well, I mean, yeah, it is a reference to Milton, but as McCarthy readers, especially, post the twin novels, like Alicia calls, says once or twice that, at the heart of reality is a deep and eternal demonium or something, like so.
Mhm.
She that word also carries forward in McCarthy's work to at least
Right.
um, the end of his life.
I love the two words steep eskers. It's just beautiful together. Steep eskers, and then esker is a ridge, and it has a whole different ecosystem than what's down below the ridge, which is pretty cool. It's rich in itself. Gorgons, and same, I've got some of the words from that same paragraph, is Sanskrit. But I obviously I think of it as Greek, you know?
Yeah, because of the Medusa.
Yeah. And then the land, the way I knew God Wandaland was from primordial, like millions of 400 million years ago. I can't and it was like Africa, like before the plates, Africa and Asia, maybe before they split. I mean, it's just a crazy, that's a long time ago.
It's
He
beautiful.
takes us right
Yeah,
back,
it's
right?
it's that sort of deep time
Yeah.
perspective, and also like again, nothing ever stops moving, right? To quote Suttree.
Mm-hmm.
So like even the land masses are made out of former land masses, and that's always going to be the case. Like it,
Mm-hmm.
they're always moving, like so everything is in motion, and this chapter is very actiony.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was funny the word ennui in there. I just feel like it's a word that it's hard to imagine McCarthy using that word for some reason. Again, that
But
French
it is like
is
it's appropriate because it's like the middle of the 19th century, and so
true.
You know,
True.
Baudelaire will be talking about ennui in a couple of decades.
Right. Yes. Yes, so true. Spanish masonry to me seemed funny because it could be the inspired stonework, but then there's Spanish Freemasonry. And we haven't even touched some of the Freemasons in the novel. They're Fort Griffin being one of them, but these
Okay.
areas were filled with Freemasonry. Cartouche. I mean, that's a Egyptian hieroglyph identifying royalty, but it's also like now we use it as like, I mean, it certainly could be almost corporate now. But again, a beautiful word and French again. So it's just a lot of fun. He's not afraid of any words.
No,
Um, for
Spanish words.
somebody who doesn't like Henry James, he's used some pretty flowery words.
I think like one way to think of the difference between their two styles is that Henry James is a proponent of hypotaxis and McCarthy of parataxis, right? McCarthy's sentences are they don't have a lot of commas in them or dependent clauses. They're fairly
Mhm.
simple, and every sentence kind of bears the equal weight of every other, kind of like stones in a wall or something like that.
Mhm.
Whereas, Henry James was like subclause within subclause, dependent clauses, so that you kind of get lost in what
Yeah.
is being, and then you actually have to, it's another form of mental exercise, like trying to figure
Yes.
out
Yes.
where you started.
I happen to have loved reading Henry James. I remember though Camille Paglia said that if you go into the campuses, you'll see people running from the English buildings, the literature buildings, because they had to read Henry James.
I also love Henry James. Yeah.
Ah, and I mean, I think that it came in the context of whether there was enough life and death, and he wants to be concerned with life and death. The thing is, in Henry James, it is life and death. It's just that it's more based on what we would call women's stories. I mean, there is a feeling of like that, what we would stereotype as a story that women would be interested in. And it's also ironic because they're very dialogue. You mentioned this dialogue based. And here is a man who has the whales and men with almost no action. You're in the ocean with whales and nothing's happening. You're just talking, right? And the Sunset Limited, the Council. I mean, these have long. The Crossing. He has long-winded dialogues in his book. I mean, leaving James in the dust, and McCarthy liked William James, the varieties of religious experience. But I feel like he didn't like James because James doesn't work in the secret history of art. That's my theory. He doesn't have that subtext, that structural hidden meaning. And he is very much a soap opera in a way, if you will, but so much better. I mean, I'm just saying that as a way of, it's a social drama, and that's not really it's not really what McCarthy is writing about, you know, more crime and punishment. Very interesting.
You really like the kind of when is it when they're in the quarry or somewhere else when the whole cantina scene when they're in the
Oh my
cantina and
God.
the fight
Yeah, can
breaks
we
out?
find that? We should read that. I mean, I thought I think that's a stunning bit of writing.
Well, yeah, it's on the bottom of 185. Within the
Oh,
cantina, the Americans had no more than seated themselves before a muttered insult from a nearby table brought three or four of them to their feet. The kid addressed the table in his wretched Spanish and demanded which among those sullen inebriates had spoken. So that, the kid is learning Spanish.
no, that's cool,
He's
right?
picking up Spanish. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Yeah, I love that.
And then, yeah, and then
I love
you
sullen
you
inebriates.
lo- yeah, sullen inebriate. I don't think the kid could say that though. Like that
No,
doesn't
probably
that's
not. He probably
it's more
didn't
like
say.
something the judge would say.
True. Or Shakespeare, yeah. Before any could own it, the first of the funeral rockets exploded there we got that happening again, right? In the tense moment. And you could just feel that they would all jump. The funeral rockets exploded in the street as told, and the entire company of Americans made for the door. A drunk at the table rose to his feet with a knife and lurched after them. His friends called after him, but he waved them away. Get this next paragraph because it's really good. John Dorsey.
Which um, John Dorsey and Henderson Smith, two boys from Missouri, were the first into the street. They were followed by Charlie Brown and the judge. The judge could see over their heads, and he raised one hand to those behind him. The beer was just passing. The fiddler and the cornetist were making little bows to each other, and their steps suggested the martial style of the air they played. "It's a funeral," said the judge. As he spoke, the drunk with the knife now reeling in the doorway sank the blade deep into the back of a man named Grimley. None saw it but the judge. Grimly put a hand on the rough wood frame of the door. "I'm killed," he said. The judge drew his belt pistol and leveled it above the heads of the men and shot the drunk through the middle of the forehead.
I'm killed.
"I'm killed," said Grimly.
Did we get that confirmed that he did die? Did we he
I think,
died?
yeah. Well, when Grimly turned, I don't know. We do see he's like slumped somewhere or something at some
Okay.
point.
But
I
it
don't.
is really funny. I'm killed. I'm killed.
I'm killed. And his name is perfectly fitting,
Yes,
Grimly.
grimly. Um, and then it carries on. The Americans outside the door were all but looking down the barrel of the judge's pistol when he fired, and most of them dove to the ground. Dorsey rolled clear and got to his feet and collided with the workers who'd been paying their respects to the passing cortege. They were putting their hats on when the judge fired. The dead man fell backward into the cantina, blood sprouting from his head. When Grimly turned, they could see the wooden handle of a knife protruding from his bloody shirt. I want to find the part I love. Oh, this is a long passage. Maybe it's
Oh,
just.
I think you love in the center of the room, Toadvine
Yes.
and Sid were standing back to back with their pistols at port like duelists.
Yes, I love that part. And it's so scary and so exciting. When you're reading it, you're right in it, and it's very Tarantino again. Or
It's
Mr.
such
and
a
Mrs.
movie
Smith.
scene.
Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and The Matrix, they have so many gun shootouts now with people back to back. I love it. Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. And then all the florid poetry with these great action scenes. Like he could have written a hard-boiled murder mystery easily. It's just done so hard-boiled. I love it. Um, there's a burning tree in this chap on page 183, and
Yeah.
it repeats again later in the novel on Christmas Day, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it's interesting that he that happens. We did mention that the judge erases a petroglyph and deletes that with the word, and then we've got that Elysian. It is hard
Yeah.
to understand what that means, but I think they're deleting the ground behind them.
Yeah.
Oh. I was reminded, so the debauchery has from the original party, they just spend all their money, they have sex with all the women, they strip the town of food, right? They completely deplete all the resources, and they leave because there's nothing left to eat, really, almost. It seems like they might have stayed there forever. I don't know. And the town is definitely sick of them. And when they go back into the town, um, the second time, I was wondering, I thought about the counselor. When Hefe talks to the counselor after he's missing his fiance and the business has fallen apart, Hefe says something like, "Did you think you could do business with men who would take the job and you'd escape unscathed?" That there's like when you hire a mercenary, are you thinking you're going to be hiring
Yeah.
someone to negotiate with, or that and there they were having dinner, but maybe the judge would fit, but the judge is going to rape your boys, so we don't know that yet. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, I mean they go from one place to another and and there's a sentence where it says like they knew where the Jelenos were, you know, winter camping,
Yes.
but that's the one place they knew for sure they weren't going to go, right? So they're not motivated by ideological, anti-indigenous or sort
Mm,
of, they don't, there is no metaphysics of Indian hating
mhm.
in like the Glanton gang or whatever, like they're really just like opportunists, maybe they have a taste for mindless violence and this is the way to get it, right? And so and they would rather be killing than being killed, and they'd rather, be making money and partying and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So in this chapter, it's like, they do have one major encounter with like the Jelenos in the last chapter, but here they slaughter, a peaceful village and then another village, and then a bunch of soldiers, that they just happen to encounter, like so
Oh,
they they're just kind of again like the the sorcerer's apprentice, like what has been let loose also in the company themselves, right? Like they just, you know, they're like addicted to, their psychopathy.
yes, and I think that there's something about that kind of marketplace mentality and the and making money like that, that they're going for the easier and easier kills, right? They're not the first fight we see them in was actually, quite quite impossible, right? It was very violent, but they got away with it. And it's almost like, well, hey, let's just keep making easy money. We got a village that isn't against, it just happens to be there, and the soldiers, you come by us, well, we're going to get your scalps because it's money. And
Yeah.
it's kind of lazy capitalism, that happens when you probably worked with somebody. I don't know if you've ever had a job, and there's always that one freeloader. They're almost like the lazy workers now in some way. What about the killing? Um, did you not say that the judge had a logic that when you're killing another, you're killing yourself?
Oh, I mean, like I was thinking back to when the judge says that each is tabernacled in every other, so that, we are each witnesses, bear witness, because each of us is kind of tabernacled, and tabernacle being kind of like a sacred space, there's a kind of sacredness to the fact that we are all interrelated and bear in ourselves the image of each other, and so yeah, I guess it kind of like there's sort of like a little bit of a Bhagavad Gita vibe in Blood Meridian in a kind of twisted way, like the relationship between the judge and the kid is sort of like maybe Krishna and Arjuna or something. And so the idea that you know, we all co-tenant in one great self or something like that is kind of similar. And so yeah, like if you're killing, and they like I said, I don't even think it's like they're not pursuing money. I think they're just like pursuing like death and destruction. Like that's what they, and money comes and goes. They're not like capitalists because they're not
No,
rational misers, right? They're not saving all
no.
the pesos. They're like just blowing it, and like they don't care. There's no future, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right. They're like that boy band that goes broke, and then
yeah.
go and make another album or something, because it's like, yeah, they don't, you're right, they weren't worried about the future. They worked so hard to get that money, and then and I guess it's been said that we should assume they're having fun. We should assume that they're actually living the life they've dreamed of. Um,
I don't know. I mean,
I
there is
don't,
no sorrowing according to Yakabuma, and like in the epigraph, the way
right?
McCarthy has elided
Uh-huh.
a clause in that epigraph suggests that it's about the pleasure taken in, death and destruction.
Right. Right. Which is funny because I mean, is there anybody as spiritual and overcoming the ego than Bohem? His works are really quite profound. So,
Yeah, so, like I did want to mention like, another sort of like totally arbitrary, I think, sort of illusion that McCarthy embeds in the novel, and like I think it's just for fun. Like I don't really see like I see a significance in the references to Tonio Kruger,
right.
but I don't really like in this sort of near the end of the chapter where they encounter a company of mounted troops,
Hmm.
and the narrator describes these troops in the following. They wore tall shakos faced with shakos. I'm not sure how to pronounce that unusual word, actually.
Yeah.
It's like a big military hat, I think.
Okay.
They wore tall shakos faced with metal plates and horsehair plumes, and they wore green coats trimmed with scarlet and scarlet sashes, and they were armed with lances and muskets, and their mounts were nicely caparisoned, and they entered the street, sidling and prancing, horsemen riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. And
Mm.
so, like, I remember I told you this, like, in my undergrad, I took a course on the Hebrew Bible, and I was like
Mhm.
doing a presentation on the book of Ezekiel.
Mm.
And, I had already read Blood Meridian probably a few dozen times by then. And all of a sudden I was like sitting in the tub, like doing research, and I come across this passage in Ezekiel and this exact phrase from the King James Version, horsemen riding upon horse, all of them desirable young men. So it's like just
Damn.
all of a sudden, some literal
Mm-hmm.
passage from the book of Ezekiel just pops out. Like, so I
Yeah.
don't know what the
Yeah.
process was. He probably just remembered it as he was
Yeah.
writing the sentence
Yeah.
and just like put it in, like this just seems like just an arbitrary citation that just happened in the moment of composition or something.
Yeah, I think that's a good
It's
insight.
really cool.
It just adds to, and it adds to the colorfulness of the sequence, and they looked amazing, and it was a really fun way to say that these
Yeah,
soldiers
yeah,
look quite handsome and attractive, and he probably just pulled it out of his memory from it or something, right? There's another part that's quite funny too that we both laughed about is Jackson, pistols drawn, lurched into the street, vowing the ass off Jesus Christ, the
yeah.
long-legged white son of a bitch.
Son of a bitch.
It's so funny. In amongst all of that, oh, that's going to make a great.
Yeah,
If they can film that, that'll be a beautiful part of the movie.
yeah.
Sure.
It would be really challenging to film that. Like, it would be, you'd have to just have all these sequences and tie them together, and
Yeah.
the movement of it all has to be primary, I think,
Yeah.
like just to show that all of this shit is happening all at the same
Yes.
time, and that would add to the kind of carnival spirit, right? Like all of a sudden you see Jackson, walk out into the street saying
Right.
that. Just
Right. Right. And maybe with his clothes too small or something. Another repetitive thing happens, or referencing to another part of the book. So we've had a couple of each was all could be optical democracy. Then we've got the closing sentence of this chapter. To me, which sounds exactly like the evening redness in the West. They rode out on the North Road as would parties bound for El Paso, but before they were even quite out of sight of the city, they had turned their tragic mounts to the west, and they rode infatuate and half fond toward the red demise of that day, toward the evening lands and the distant pandemonium of the sun.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and it's also reminiscent of something else in the novel, which I guess the tragic mounts he said before, it's very cool. It's very
yeah.
cool.
I think like pandemonium or whatever, tragic appears a couple times in this chapter. I could be wrong about that, but
Well, Pandemoniac and Pandemonium for sure, and Tragic Mounts might too. And the thanatos of this passage that they're almost welcoming their end game. They're not they know it's their end game, and and then we go back to the Phoenix Riddle. Um,
yeah.
what's on four legs, three legs, no, three legs, two legs, three legs, right?
Oh,
And
four legs, two legs,
two
three
legs,
legs.
three legs. Thank you. And 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 the judge's comment earlier in the previous about the meridian of your life is also your downfall of your life. That's the humans reach this apex, and then right after that, that's it. You're going every time after that is it's down.
Yeah, and Pandemonium is, of course, the capital city of hell, so that's where they're going, right? Like, but that's
Yes,
also where they are. I mean, it's
yes,
hell.
yes.
It's a
Yeah,
story about it.
yeah. And I love it that they go into the town twice, it is pretty cool.
Maybe even three times.
Maybe even three times.
Yeah, I think they actually might enter it
Interesting.
a second time in the middle, like as they're kind of going from place to place. I don't know. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
I'm just looking. I turned to the last page to read that
yeah,
sentence with you, and
yeah.
now I'm looking at 192, where it says the Americans dug a pit in the road and
Hmm.
buried them in a common grave, the naked bodies with their wounds like the victims of surgical experimentation.
Right.
lying in the pit, gaping sightlessly at the desert sky as the dirt was pushed over them. That
Mm-hmm.
also has kind of modern vibes, like
Mm-hmm.
surgical experimentation, sort of, and mass graves. These are
Yes.
very modern kind of horrors.
Holocaust horror, yes, for sure. Definitely. Um, the that sentence too, that end sentence about rode infatuate and half fond toward the red demise is also the half reminds us we're half on towards the end of the novel. We've gone through the middle of the novel. And as a reader, you don't when you love a book, you don't really want it to end. And yet you've got to find out how it ends. So it really captured a reader's mentality for me, and then a self-consciousness about this book and this story, that we're past the middle now. We're going to go to the end.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's amazing. And and weird. Like they wrote infatuate and half fond.
I know, I
Like
don't get it.
also infatuate is like not half infatuate, but fully infatuate,
I
but only
know.
half fond.
I don't know. I
It's,
don't know.
yeah, it's
It's so
odd.
profound feeling though, isn't it? It triggers something profound in you. And I'm not, breaking down that
It's
half
a
on.
long,
Bittersweet?
yeah.
Another way to say bittersweet. Oh yeah, and here's the other sentence. The way of the world is to bloom and flower and die, but in the affairs of men there is no waning, and the noon of his expression signals the onset of night. Um, you know, again, this death drive, the Thanatos or whatever, death drive in this novel. And a beginning, middle, and end. Um,
Like I just thought of sort of like in Beowulf. I remember, I don't know much about Beowulf, but I remember reading like articles on how the Beowulf poem is structured, and one of the readings is that right in the middle of Beowulf is I think the story of Grendel's mother.
yeah.
And so Grendel's mother's death occurs right in the middle of the poem.
Hmm,
And the reasoning that this Old English scholar sort of had was that women in those cultures were sort of like peacemakers, and so they would, you know, work toward establishing the bonds between different male parties or something like that. And so by placing Grendel's mother in the middle, it kind of ties the two parts of the Beowulf, which are quite different, right? Like in the beginning and the end, like, Beowulf is a different person or whatever. So like, but it's a way of tying the two halves of the novel. So, but you're pointing out how emphasized that this is the middle,
mhm,
and we just finished the first half, and now we're entering the second half. It
mhm,
gives it sort of like almost like a twofold structure, like Blood Meridian we just went through, and
yeah.
now we're going through the evening redness in the west. You know what
Oh,
I mean? So
interesting
it's
way to put
sort of
that.
like
Yes, yes.
lovely, like balancing of two sides rather than thinking of it as, a linear progression.
Mm.
Anyways, like,
And I think it also ties into this idea of a triumphal form, of a form that in is hidden in the book, and going into that might be a good time to say how I had a weird feeling when I was, this novel for me, this chapter is interesting because I've enjoyed it so much more because I wasn't focused. In the past, my pattern recognition is so intense that I only notice the numbers, and we'll get to that in a second. But
yeah,
I noticed the Riddle, and the hotel they stay in is Riddle and Stevens Hotel. And something in me went to look into John Sepich and see how real that was. Was there really a hotel? And then, of course, I Googled, and there's
yeah.
been a nickname for the Menger Hotel, which is much later time frame. That's going to be in The Crossing with John Grady Gold. And I've been to the Menger Hotel in San Antonio. It's really cool. But it was nicknamed the Riddle and Spencer's because
Stevens?
yeah, one of the men who owned it. Let me see if I can see it. Bennett Riddles was the owner of that, and Stevenson. So somehow it got nicknamed Riddle and Stevens, and I wonder if it was left over from Chihuahua City. Riddle and Stevens probably was a
Yeah,
well-known hotel.
I
Um,
think it was a real place.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but In fact, John Seppert said that that's not the spelling, but it was misspelled in another book by John Hobbs, maybe, and that McCarthy adopted that misspelling even though he knew it was wrong. So of
Right.
course I'm thinking Riddle Hotel, because a Riddle Hotel is an old is a trendy at that time period between 1750 and 1850. It was really trendy to have these books of riddles, and one of the riddles is that three people go into a hotel and they pay $10. And later the concierge remembers that it's only $9. So sends a bellhop back to give them each he gives them $5 to give them back to return because he charged $30 and it was only 25. Well, the bellhop realizes I can't break a five, so I can't divide up five, so I'll keep two and give them $1 each. And at the end of the riddle is that how come there's $1 left? So to me, that riddle is interesting because it's how you tell the story. If you don't pay attention to the sequence of algebra, I think you have to do it algebraic to realize the exact, really $9 by each guest, plus three more dollars, and then $2 in the bellhop. But when you do the story told the original riddle, it's $1 left over. So it's kind of a misdirection. And we've talked
Right.
about misdirection in this novel,
Yes.
and the history of magic is and art is misdirection. So I thought that was cool. But then I'm also thinking there's Stephen's riddle from Ulysses. Now I don't know if he's having fun with that or not, but it's come to my mind. And that riddle could be, I don't know how that would impact it, but I just wanted to mention it. Maybe somebody will think about it. Maybe you'll think about it. Maybe we'll come to it. Like, could it be referencing from Ulysses? But the cock crew, the sky was blue, the bells in heaven were striking 11. 'Tis time for this poor soul to go to heaven. Um, I don't
Yeah.
know if that means anything. I don't know if it's relevant. It takes a lot to even figure out what it means in Ulysses. It's something to do.
Well, yeah, that's like Stephen, that this is in the Nestor episode,
Yes.
so chapter 2, and Stephen is teaching a class of kind of super bored students, familiar feeling. And and he's like it's like the end of the class and he's like do you guys want to hear a riddle? And so he says that riddle and I think he makes it up.
Oh.
And he give well, no, and then somebody I said and nobody can guess what the riddle is.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, please tell us, please. And he says it's the fox burying his grandmother under a holly bush
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. So
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
answer to the riddle,
Yeah.
which is of course kind of also just as riddling, right?
It is just as riddling.
As the riddle is like a riddle of an answer. But I
Yeah.
mean, it may be to do with because Stephen has lost his mother at the beginning of Ulysses, right? His mother has died from cancer, and he has had to come back from Paris, and now he's back in Ireland, and his wings are clipped, and he's back in, he's Daedalus,
Mm-hmm.
back trapped in the island like his namesake was in Crete.
Yes.
And so like it may have something to do with his, the death of his mother, and the kid is born
Mm-hmm.
through the death of his mother, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
the dead mother also kind of like
Mm-hmm.
hovers across maybe this novel too, like in some way. And I don't know, the circumstances of McCarthy's mother's death or how that affected him or whatever, but it certainly affected Joyce enough to, pattern Stephen's life after his own.
Oh, yeah, very interesting. That's a great connection. And just something to think about, you know? And I mean it's not hitting you over the head or anything. It's just that it just drew that to me. And I thought, is he having a little bit of fun with that? There's another connection to James Joyce in this chapter in Finnegan's Wake, the
Yeah.
number 28. Um, it comes up in the children's hour with Izod and the flower girls. There are 28 flower girls, and Izod makes 29. So 28 is a lunar number and a menstrual number.
Yeah.
29 could be leap year. So there's a calendrical thing there. But these numbers in this chapter to me are such a mystery because, again, if I was an editor, I would have said you have 128 scalps and eight severed heads. How come halfway through the rest of this chapter you have 28 scalps and eight heads? why don't they have 7 heads? Why don't they have 125? Why you have to have these numbers like this? The chapter title headings are 28 as well, which is a lot,
Wow.
is a lot. And
Yeah.
in a big chapter, of course, it's going to be, I think the highest chapter headers are 31. In fact, all of the chapter headers seem to fit into, under a month, a full month. They don't go higher than 31. I don't know,
Hmm.
it's not covering every day of the month, and some numbers repeat, like 8 and 16. So the numbers that I found in this, and I count the quadrille as a 4 and an 8,
Yes.
because there's
Yes.
4 couples and there's 8 measures to the music. But we've got 28, 128, 8, 4, 8, 28, 8, and 8,000. Um, the eights are a factor of 64, and 64 is a cyclical number, which ties into your vibe of this being a pattern or repeating or cycle. And it's also a factor in the number 25,920. That number is important to me because that's the number of precessions, of years in a precession when the Earth's axis changes. And people have been recording that for at least, I'm going to say 15,000 years. Certainly the Rig Veda, the number of syllables correlates to the number of years in the precession. Just the freaking syllables in the Rig Veda.
Hmm.
And it's in artifacts, it's referenced like stupas, they have bricks that represent that number. Um, and the North Star changes. It won't be Polaris in another 10,000 years. The number 8,000, you can use the factors of 128 times 4 times 4 times 4 minus 128 4 times 4 times 4. Oh, it's interesting that, and I want to thank my friend Andrew because I texted him these numbers. I said, "Can you do anything with these?" Because I'm kind of like stumped. And that's when I knew the 64 because 8 times 8 is 64, and I had presented that in relationship to a stupa that has ththese numbers in a stupa, an Asian artifact, in a
There's
big.
also 64 squares on a chessboard, 8 by 8.
Absolutely, and that's very critical. That's very related to that. In a magic square, you can get some correlations. And in a bottom of a stupa is considered a Chinese, in the Chinese stupas, it's a magic square. In China, different cultures had their own um strange squares. So I don't want to talk too long and be boring about numbers, but I do think that how could you have those and specifically not put them in there and have them be so relatable to each other? So I want to thank my friend Andrew, who we call Fusion, for noticing that multiplication. And 1 plus 8 times 4 times 4 fits, all works its way towards 8,000, which is kind of neat and tidy. And we do know that McCarthy had a hobby of math, so maybe it's something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so much like that again, it sort of seems like a mark of intention, right? Like, and you don't know
Yes.
what the
Yeah,
intention
and
is,
not yet.
but it seems like there's pointing going on, like it's indexical of something.
Yeah, and then in the chapter with Riddle and Stevens Hotel with a riddle, the word riddle in there, and it could have been spelled Riddle or Riddell, but he
Yeah.
chooses to spell it Riddle. Again, I like your term mark of intention rather than saying it's intentional. We don't have to argue about that. It's a suggestion, right? I like that, a mark of intention. Also chapter 13, 1 and 3 could add up to 4. So it could all be part of these factors, right? Because they're all factors of each other, which is pretty interesting. Um, I noticed in John Sepich too, there was a real life Kirk who he had a bounty for $9,000. And I guess Glanton is a little bit fashioned some of his.
Yeah, yeah, James
Yeah,
Kirker, which
yeah.
I always thought was weird. Like, is that where
Oh,
Gene
did they?
Roddenberry got
I
the name of his first
wonder,
captain?
could it be?
James T.
I
Kirk.
know, could it be? So funny. Yeah. It's funny, I did that presentation on the stupa and I had made models of stupas to say that McCarthy works in this secret art history, right? And Rick Wallach was in Albuquerque. I had charts on the walls with all the chapter heading numbers. And my poor area chair, Catherine, she's like, oh no, here she goes. And they kept falling off the wall. Stag would try to put them back up, and my stupas would fall over. And Rick's eyes were rolling. Well, he was like, again, how many numbers is she gonna talk about? What the hell? And the stupa, I don't get it. When he got home from the conference, he was tidying up his desk. and he moved some books around. And not only did he have a book on the stupa, he had the same book I was referencing. He was like, God damn it, maybe Candy's onto something here. But he said when he got home, he couldn't believe there was a book on his right in front of him, and the same book I had.
That is
It,
awesome.
it was really funny, yeah. Um, I love this chapter. I think it's such perfection with the different pacing, the different um styles of writing. It's really incredible. It's interesting. We haven't really tagged on to what the narrator's vibe is in this very much. Where we usually are like, why'd the narrator say this? We haven't really kind of felt that this time. I should probably go back and read it
Yeah,
again.
I
Think about that.
we probably should because the witness is the prime thing, right? And the narrator is the witness of everything
Yeah,
or everything that's
yeah.
recorded.
What is that about
So
the witness? What's the deal with that? Maybe it's something that maybe I know it, maybe I don't know it. Why is a witness so important? Is it that you have company, or that you don't exist unless somebody saw you exist?
yeah, I think it's sort of more the latter, I
Yeah,
guess, or it's something
it
more
seems so
about more
conceited.
physical, like
It just seems
things
so.
don't happen unless they're observed.
Yeah, so the tree falling in the forest kind of a thing.
But
But that,
like who is the narrator in this chapter? Like the narrator, he I guess travels through time, references things that are happening in the 20th century and poetry and blah blah blah.
tectonic plates.
And yeah, so his temporal bandwidth is like quite like capacious, even though most of the time they're focused on, certain events that happened in the middle of the 19th century. But spatially too, like how does one witness able to handle all the things that are happening in these cinematic sequences, right? Like focused on the dogs and the horses and the men and
Mhm.
um, so what does that say about the witness?
Yeah, it's just something that's I don't know. It's funny I'm saying this, that it's something I don't think about, and yet I work in a public space. I'm a painter. I'm an artist, and I'm putting it. It's not like I'm doing this at home as a hobby. It's not a. It has to go and be have a public judgment. So it's funny that I'm like I don't get the witness thing, right? But in a way, I guess I do.
But
But
maybe the witness is like this intelligence or whatever that McCarthy speaks of when he says that we are fractal of this intelligence or something, because like, I'm witnessing you, but then you're witnessing me, and then somebody else is witnessing you, and somebody else is, so the witness is always like this kind of element that
yeah,
that doesn't really have a place, right? But goes from place to place as sort of like an occupant without a place, if I could quote Gilles Deleuze for a sec, like so the witness is almost like this thing that exists between everything or and is constantly on the move, tying everything together.
hmm.
I don't know, like I'm just kind of
Well, I guess a
spitballing.
reader is a witness too, right? I mean, we want that.
Yes,
We want to
exactly. Yeah.
we want to be suspend our disbelief. We want to be you to enjoy a book at all, you've got to be humble. You've got to be willing to let someone else take over the limelight. And so a
Yeah.
witness is a beautifully humble person. In some of our at the Buddhist temple, we had a bunch of these meetings, kind of heated meetings. There was some crisis and called everyone to have this big meeting. And one of the women brought one of her friends who was just going to sit there and listen. It was extremely moving. She was, no, I'm just here to listen. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just a listener. It made you think before you spoke. It made you very aware
It
that there
sounds
was
like almost like a Brechtian theater technique of, like let's uh let's
great.
shake things up so you don't know what to expect
Yeah. Well,
or you have to, yeah, you realize you're being witnessed, right? I guess is the
yes.
thing.
Yeah, maybe that's it. So two things. I want to answer to the Brechtian thing, but in a little ways, but also here's the quote, okay, that was in the Smithsonian that Stacy Peebles found in a book. It was a marginalia. Okay, in another book. I don't remember the title of the book. I don't know if she said it. There is an intelligence to the universe of which we are fractal, and that intelligence has a character, and that character is benign, intends well toward all things. How could it not? So there we know McCarthy believes that we're inner good. I would say.
Yeah, it's a, like it sounds, it's kind of like couched in, contemporary physics language with fractal, but it's a very orthodox conception of, I guess, God,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
and maybe it's like a Platonic good God because the goodness is kind of weak,
Mm,
like in Plato, but
mm.
in Christianity, God is all powerful, so therefore all these contradictions arise. Like, well, how can God allow for, Donald Trump to happen? So like, yeah, so
Or Holocaust to happen, or car accidents
yeah,
happen. Yeah.
yeah. So it's sort of like you need a theodicy to justify the ways of God to men.
Mm, mm,
Whereas, with a weak weak goodness, you don't need that. It's just,
mm.
I don't, but anyways, yeah.
Well,
Um,
yeah. Thinking of Witness and thinking of Brecht. I just we're almost wrapping up here, I'm sure, but I do want to say I was really lucky. We've both been busy, but
oh yeah. Oh
I
my
was on the
God.
East Coast and I went to New York City for a few days and I was able to see the play, speaking of God, the play Waiting for Godot. And it was starring Keanu Reeves, my best friend, and Alex Winter, Bill and Ted fame. And they did the Waiting for Godot play. It was fucking wonderful. It was so much fun, and the audience was so fun. There was like your classic theater lovers. Some of them left because they were like, I guess this isn't for me. They probably were more used to Hamilton or something, or wanted to see some famous people. But a lot of people were fans of Keanu, fans of Bill and Ted, or just, young people who wanted to come and go. It was a mostly young audience, although all ages. But anyway, I even got a t-shirt. It was wonderful. And in that witness part, in a way, there's a sense of a witness because what else do they have to do except kind of look at each other? There's five characters in the play, but it's predominantly these two um, characters. I've gone blank on their names right now. That's okay.
Vladimir and Estragon?
Yes, there you go. Thank you. And they just hang out, and sometimes they're very upset, and sometimes they don't know why they're waiting for this guy to show up. What's he going to do? Give them direction? Oh, we don't know if it's a guy. I don't know. It's Godot. And then sometimes it was very funny. At one point, they did make something self-referential. Speaking of back to back, because of like
Yeah.
finding the kid. At one point, they're like leaning on each other and talking, and then they stop and they go, and they go, that was familiar, and it carries on. And I mean, the crowd went crazy. And I thought that was good that they made the reference.
Yeah.
And they did some things where they're like, I don't know, they felt sad and they were like lonely, and they're like, hug me, give me a hug. And it was so cute because it was such a hopeful moment in their of like just sitting there timeless. Speaking of time, what is the time frame of Godot? Because it feels like it's could be infinite, you know? That
Yeah.
it like how long have they been standing there? Anyway, that was a really thrill. And I was thinking maybe I'll do a presentation or submit a proposal to compare the Sunset Limited to Waiting for Godot. They're both kind of sad and
Yeah.
not Sunset Limited. At least Godot is funny, but
Kind of trap dialogues.
crap dialogues. And again, back to Henry James. This whole McCarthy loves dialogue, so it's kind of funny that he's not a big fan of Henry James.
But he hates psychology and inwardness and
And
interior. So
they are kind of psychological social dramas. You're right. That's a good point. Yeah. And in all this marginalia that they found and notes in McCarthy stuff, even in the archives, his reduction often is taking away the explanatory part that would answer questions. And I read someone's dissertation, and he had gone to the archives, and it's quite apparent that the road is a human-made disaster. But he takes that out of it, which makes the novel a whole new thing. And he takes out those explanations, which, leave it ambiguous, but leave it generative.
he elides things.
Yes, he does. He elides things. Oh, wait, great way to end this podcast. Are we good?
Yes, we shall
And we
elide this
should
episode.
certainly like someone to email us if they could at bloodmeridiannow@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.